He's here to take me home. That's what she said every night for 2 weeks. She wasn't delirious. She wasn't confused. She wasn't speaking to me or to her daughter or to the aide who came in at 2 a.m. to reposition her. She was looking at a specific point in the room, near the window, slightly to the left of the radiator, and saying those words with the certainty of someone reporting a simple fact. Her name was Margaret, 74 years old, retired elementary school teacher, 31 years in Portland Public Schools. She came to us in October with ovarian cancer at stage 4, peritoneal carcinomatosis, and the particular kind of composure that I have learned over 22 years of working with dying people usually means someone has already done the internal work of accepting what is happening to them. She wasn't fighting it. She wasn't asking questions that didn't have good answers. She was more concerned, she told me on her second night, about her daughter than about herself. Her husband, Henry, had died 2 years and 8 months earlier. Parkinson's disease. She had cared for him at home for most of it, through the progressive tremor, through the shuffled gait, through the episodes of freezing where he would stand in a doorway for 10 or 15 seconds, completely still, unable to make his body do what he was asking it to do. And through what happens in later stage Parkinson's that people outside medicine don't always know about, the face becomes a mask. It has a clinical name: hypomimia. The motor pathways that govern facial expression depend on dopaminergic signaling. When that signaling is depleted, the face simply stops moving. Not because the person isn't feeling anything. They are. They feel everything. They just can't express it on their face anymore. Families find this devastating. Henry's face had been like that for the last 2 years of his life. Margaret had learned to read him differently, through his hands, through his eyes, through the pressure of a grip. But his face had lost what she once described to me as the conversation it used to have with his whole body. He died on a Tuesday morning in February. The visit started on Margaret's 3rd night with us. She mentioned it to me the next morning, the way a patient mentions something they want documented. Matter of fact, not seeking a reaction. "My husband came to see me last night," she said. "He said he's here to take me home." I wrote it down. I checked her chart, looked at her medications. She was on opioids for pain management, hydromorphone and long-acting morphine, dexamethasone for inflammation. Nothing with a documented hallucinatory profile at the doses she was receiving. I also know what opioid-induced confusion looks like. It has a specific signature. The patient is disoriented across multiple domains. The content is fragmented and internally inconsistent, and it tends to worsen at night in a pattern you can track. It does not produce nightly experiences of the same deceased person delivering the same message with calm, consistent specificity. What Margaret described was not confusion. What she described was Henry, standing near the window, wearing, she told me, that awful blue blazer I gave him for our anniversary, the one he pretended to love. I want you to stay with that detail for a moment. Her daughter Sandra arrived 4 days later. Sandra was 49, a nurse practitioner, practical and competent, and exactly as clinical as you would expect a healthcare professional to be when processing a parent's terminal admission. She asked the right questions. She reviewed the medication list. When I briefed her on what Margaret had been describing, Sandra said very levelly, "The hippocampus generates comfort images under stress. She's constructing what she needs." She had her pen out to take notes. I told her about the blue blazer. Sandra stopped writing. Margaret's description, the 40th anniversary blazer, a specific deep blue, the one she'd bought him at Nordstrom and he'd worn maybe 3 times. She described him not just wearing it. She described him the way he had been before the Parkinson's, standing straight, no tremor, his face fully mobile. Smiling, she said, with his whole face, the way he used to. Sandra put down her pen. She stood up, excused herself, and I found her 2 minutes later in the corridor with her back against the wall and her hands covering her face. The blazer had been donated to Goodwill after Henry died. Sandra was the one who had packed up his clothes. Margaret had been too ill to help. Sandra had not told her mother about the donations. Margaret had not seen that blazer since Henry last wore it, years before his death. She had no way of knowing where any of it had gone. The blazer existed in a space Margaret had no access to. The visits continued, 11 more nights, and I started looking things up. This was 2017, before my own surgery, before everything that happened to me in 2019. I was still in the camp of clinical explanation, firmly. I started looking the way you look at something that won't fit into any of your existing boxes. Not to confirm, not to disprove, just to understand why the box wasn't closing. I found Elizabeth Kübler-Ross first. You probably know her name. On Death and Dying, the 5 Stages of Grief. What people don't always know is that she spent the last decades of her life documenting something she hadn't planned to find. She had interviewed thousands of people at the threshold of death, across diagnoses and cultures and belief systems, and what she kept encountering was this. The dying reported being met by someone, almost always someone who had preceded them, almost always someone they had loved. She was a scientist. She wrote about it with the particular frustration of someone who knows what the data says and knows exactly how it will be received. Thousands of people all around the globe share the same experience prior to death, the awareness of friends or relatives who preceded them in death. Then I found Osis and Haraldson. Carlos Osis was a psychologist at the American Society for Psychical Research. Erlendur Haraldsson was a professor at the University of Iceland. In 1977, they published one of the most rigorous, systematic investigations of deathbed visions ever conducted. They sent questionnaires to physicians and nurses in the United States and India. 1,700 responses across the 2 countries, representing observations from tens of thousands of dying patients. They did it cross-culturally by specific design because their argument was this: if what the dying report is generated by the brain's own cultural programming, the content should vary significantly between a secular American hospital and a hospital in rural India. What they found was that the pattern held across both. In both countries, 91% of the apparitions that dying patients reported were deceased relatives. 3 out of 4 were described as appearing for a specific purpose, to take the patient somewhere. Across Hindu patients and Christian patients, and patients who believed in nothing, the figure near the end of the bed was almost always someone the dying person had loved. And the person was almost always described as appearing in better health than when they died. More mobile, more expressive, more themselves. Here's what I need you to understand about that finding. In later stage Parkinson's disease, patients lose facial mobility, the face masks. Margaret's husband had lost that in his final years, and what she described visiting her every night was not the husband she had last seen, masked, stiff, diminished by the disease. It was the husband she had known for 40 years before Parkinson's got to his face. That specific detail fits exactly what the cross-cultural data documents. Christopher Kerr is a palliative care physician at Hospice Buffalo in New York. He has spent years doing longitudinal work with dying patients, over 1,400 people, interviewed repeatedly with consistent protocols. He published his first systematic findings in the Journal of Palliative Medicine in 2014. 88% of his hospice patients reported at least one end-of-life vision before they died. Visions featuring deceased relatives appeared with increasing frequency as the death approached. Patients who had been significantly anxious became, following these experiences, calm. The phrase Kerr uses in his published work is that the dying seem to be comforted and guided. I read Osis and Haraldsson in my car in the hospital parking lot at 11 o'clock at night after my shift. I remember the specific feeling of reading the India findings, that Hindu patients, operating within a completely different framework for what the afterlife is supposed to look like, were reporting something structurally identical to what I was watching Margaret experience. The specific figures differed. The pattern, the deceased relative, the escort function, the expression of peace, did not. That night I went back on shift. Margaret was 14 days in. Her vitals had been trending in the direction they always trend at the end. Blood pressure lower, breathing pattern shifting. The small signs that experienced nurses learn to read the way a good mechanic reads an engine. At 3 a.m, those signs accelerated. I called Sandra, who had been sleeping in the chair by the bed for the past 4 nights. She came awake immediately, the way healthcare workers do. 1 second asleep, next second completely present. Margaret opened her eyes. She looked toward the window. Not at Sandra, not at me. At whatever she had been seeing every night for 2 weeks. She said, "He's here." Her voice was clear, not confused, not fading. The voice of someone who has been waiting for something and has now seen it arrive. She died 12 minutes later. Her face, in those final minutes, did not look like the face of someone in distress. It did not look like the face of someone fighting something. It looked like a person who had just recognized a place. I've been with a lot of people at the moment of death. I know what the different kinds of dying look like. There is dying that looks like exhaustion. There is dying that looks like fear. There is dying that looks like a door slamming. Margaret's looked like a door opening from the other side. I think about a patient I had years before all of this. She was 28 years old. She came in with a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a rupture of a cerebral aneurysm at the base of the brain. No family in Portland. An emergency contact number in Arizona that never answered. She was unconscious on arrival. She never woke up. She died on the 3rd day, and the most intimate thing I could offer her was to be sitting next to her bed when it happened. I didn't know then to wonder whether someone came for her. After Margaret. After what I experienced myself in 2019. After reading Osis and Haraldson in a hospital parking lot and finding that the pattern held from Portland to rural India. I think about that young woman differently now. I don't know what she experienced in those 3 days. I don't know if there was someone near that window too. I hope there was. Sandra called me 6 months after Margaret died. Just to talk, she said. She said she kept thinking about the blazer, not as a mystery to solve anymore. She had stopped trying to solve it. She said it differently than that. I keep thinking about what it means that he wore that. I knew what she meant, not the explanation, the implication, that her father's objects were not simply objects, that the goodwill donation had not been a final goodbye after all, that the conversation between her parents, one she had watched and been held by for 43 years, had not ended on a Tuesday morning in February when his breathing stopped. I don't know what Margaret saw those 14 nights. I know what I saw, a woman with a terminal diagnosis who was more afraid for her daughter than for herself, who became, as the days passed and the visits continued, less afraid of anything at all. Whose room, in those last nights, had a quality I have difficulty naming in clinical vocabulary. If you are sitting with someone who is dying, if you are watching them speak to a person you cannot see, reach toward a corner of the room, say a name you thought you would never hear them say again, please don't dismiss it. Not because I can explain it to you, but because Margaret's face in those 12 minutes after she said, "He's here," told me something that none of the boxes I was trained to use have been able to contain. Whatever was in that room, she recognized it, and she was not afraid.